Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to Managing Mental Health After Cancer Diagnosis. During this seminar, all participants will be in a listen-only mode, and there will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation using questions submitted through the Q&A feature. Please remember that the information provided in this web seminar is not intended as a substitute for your physician's guidance and care. My name is Sarah Rothschild, and I'm the Executive Director of the LifeRaft Group, and I would like to introduce our presenter for today. We would like to also thank Cogent, Genentech, Decipher, IDRx, and Novartis for their educational grants for today's webinar. So now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Sarah Paul, who is the Director of Clinical Programs and is responsible for delivering CancerCare's free services to people whose lives are affected by cancer while overseeing administrative aspects of the social work department. Sarah is passionate about creating and developing specialized programs to meet the needs of underserved populations and has a specialization in working with children, adolescents, and young adults. Before starting at CancerCare, she received her BA in psychology from SUNY New Paltz and her master's in social work from Silverman School of Social Work at Hunter College. She is a board-certified oncology social worker, and in 2020, she was awarded the Aquamarine Leadership Award by the National Association of Social Workers, New York City chapter. We're very excited to have her today, and I'm going to have her get started with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for having me today. I'm so excited to get started on talking about a very important topic, and especially for those that don't know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So it's definitely a timely conversation. And so I've been at CancerCare for about 9 years. And so this is definitely a topic that I could spend a lot of time on. But today we're kind of just going to scratch the surface, learn about mental health in different ways that you can manage it. Your mental health is everything. Prioritize it. Make the time like your life depends on it, because it does. Mel Robbins. So the hope is that following this webinar, you'll be able to develop a better understanding of mental health, learn to identify symptoms of mental health concerns, destigmatize asking for help and finding the right type of support, understand common challenges faced by people with cancer and also their caregivers, and identify realistic ways to take care of your mental health. So it's really common to struggle with mental health when you've been diagnosed or a loved one has been diagnosed. And these struggles can really happen at any point in the cancer experience. It might be at diagnosis, during treatment, once treatment has finished, or even later on. So it's really important to know that there's no right or wrong time to start feeling any particular way. So let's start off with a broad definition of mental health. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It impacts everything. It affects how we think, how we feel, how we act. And mental health can change throughout a lifetime, and it's determined by many different things. More than 50% of people will be diagnosed with a mental illness or disorder at some point in their lifetime. 50%, that's a really large number. And there are several factors that can protect someone from developing serious mental health concerns, like emotional and physical safety, but we know that mental health is multi-determined, right? And when we're thinking about cancer, 1 out of 3 people treated for cancer have a common mental health condition like anxiety, depression, etc. And research has shown that those patients that have mental health symptoms that go untreated actually have poorer health outcomes over time. And then when we're thinking about caregivers, because we know cancer impacts everyone, research has shown that 42% of cancer caregivers have experienced depression. So again, this is not something, it's probably not new, this topic, and really understanding how important it is to talk about the things that you're going through. But I think it's also to talk about how to break the mental health stigma. Because before we really get into mental health symptoms and how to identify struggles, it really can be, you can be impacted by talking about mental health in general. So I listed some of, some stigmatized terms here: basket case, mental, disturbed, unstable. And we know that stigma comes from a lack of understanding or fear about something. And we've seen over time that that stigma causes a ripple effect. And it really impacts people's ability to connect to support and connect to their community. There often is a reluctance to seek help or get support because you feel badly about what people might think. There's a lack of understanding by family, friends, coworkers, or other people in your support system. You might think there are fewer opportunities for work, school, social activities, or even trouble finding housing due to mental health concerns. There's a fear of bullying and physical violence or harassment. And of course, the fear that health insurance or even lack thereof won't cover your mental health treatment, or there's a lack of access to mental health treatment. Cultural, spiritual, religious factors, of course. And then this overarching belief that nothing will help, that nothing can improve your situation as it is right now. So like I said in the beginning, mental health can be impacted at any time, including after your treatment has finished. And people react in all different ways and also find their unique ways to cope. And this is a message that you'll hear throughout this presentation because it is really important to understand how individualized a cancer experience is. While yes, there are common things that people experience and feelings that they have, we don't have to put anybody into a specific box, okay? So these are some of the things that are really common. Having a feeling of loss. There's a lot of grief involved when you're diagnosed with cancer or caring for someone with cancer. Feeling a low mood or worried and panicked. Finding it more difficult to do day-to-day activities. Find that it's difficult to focus or concentrate. Feeling tearful, angry, frightened. Having sleep problems. And this might be that you can't fall asleep, or you're sleeping too much, or you wake up in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep. You might feel more vulnerable and maybe not as resilient as before. And of course, the loss of control, which is a big theme here too, as well. So here are some challenges, common challenges for patients. We know, and I've said this, that cancer impacts not just the patient, but of course, everyone involved, especially caregivers and loved ones. And having cancer is going to impact the physical, social, emotional, and spiritual parts of life. So these are many of the common challenges. Trouble coping in general, and we'll spend more time talking about what coping is and how to do it. Feeling apart from family and friends, right? Feeling isolated. Experiencing changes in how a family gets along and works together. A lot of family dynamics can change when cancer is introduced to the family system. And this can be really, really difficult. Problems making decisions, right? Think about all the choices and decisions that have to be made. There's a lot of stress that comes along with those. Concerns about not being able to do what you enjoy, right? Lifestyle is always impacted by cancer. And it can be difficult to keep up certain routines that were keeping you healthy and feeling calm. Problems working or going back to work. We know that work is almost always disrupted by a cancer diagnosis. Even if you're able to work or get modifications for your job, it can be difficult to continue to work. Financial concerns, worries about money. Cancer is expensive. Stress about making choices of care. Problems talking about how you're feeling. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. Changes in how you feel about your body and your sexual self, right? This could be physical identity. This could be emotional identity. Cancer changes intimacy. Cancer changes how we see ourselves. Grief, like I said, there's a lot of grief involved. Grief doesn't just refer to the loss of a loved one. There are so many different layers of loss when experiencing cancer, whether you're a patient, survivor, caregiver, and it's really important to acknowledge those layers of loss. Fear of the cancer coming back, of course, fear of death and dying. I also want to spend some time talking about caregivers because research has shown that distress is just as prominent in caregivers as it is for patients, and that it can negatively affect how the caregiver provides support to the patient, and of course, also how they take care of themselves. So some of the common challenges that we see here are chronic stress, right? Lack of time for self, that's a big one. right? We are deprioritizing our needs to put our loved ones' needs above our own, often. Financial worries for the same reasons. Cancer is expensive. It puts stress on other areas of life. Fear of job loss or job change. This is a big one for caregivers too. If there are any caregivers listening to this webinar, I'm sure that you can relate having to take off work or even take FMLA or change something about your career to support your loved one. Fear of your loved one's cancer getting worse or returning. Fear of death of your loved one. And then, of course, balancing your own needs with caregiving. So we talked about challenges, but I also just want to list some emotions here. And I really want you to think about, are these things that I've felt before? Are these things that I was able to cope with? Or did I feel stuck in certain aspects of my cancer experience where I wish I had more support? So cancer affects everyone in different ways, like we said, and some of the most common feelings that are expressed from both patients and caregivers, this is general, shock, right? Anger, feelings of guilt, which we'll talk more about, frustration, loss or lack of identity, lack of confidence, feeling of hopelessness, sadness, isolation, anxiety, emptiness, and feeling weak, not just physically, but also emotionally as well. A lot of questions come about around what if I was struggling with my mental health before cancer? How do I know when I need help, or what will it be like for me? So it is important to know that if you've been struggling with mental health throughout your life or at any point in your life, that these feelings can become more intense when we introduce a cancer diagnosis and can exacerbate other mental health concerns. So it's really important to be open with your medical team, as long as you feel comfortable, about your mental health history, right? They can't help support you, or they can't predict of how certain things might impact you if they don't know what's going on. And then really thinking ahead to try to get support before you absolutely need it, because it can help you cope and maintain the quality of life, right? And we do, listen, most people are going through challenging times even before they're diagnosed with cancer. So we know that that extra layer that added layer of stress is going to impact mental health. It's going to impact how we feel, how we act. And so really this is a preventative message for those that have struggled before. There's nothing wrong with connecting to get more support. Now talking about identifying mental health concerns, right? So it's important to know that yes, cancer has a profound impact on mental and emotional well-being of those that have been diagnosed, but not all mental health symptoms mean that you have a disorder. So it's really important to take into account the severity of symptoms, how often you're feeling them, the impact they have on your life, if there's a history with these symptoms, because it's not so black and white. Right. And like I said, for those that have historically struggled with mental illness in the past, cancer is going to make this worse, so it can be extra challenging. And so most patients can be expected to experience some impact on their mental health. And, again, sadness, worrying, anxiety. But research shows that an average of 30 to 35% of cancer patients are actually suffering from a mental health disorder that's going untreated. And studies also show that a lot of times mental health issues are actually minimized by medical teams because they may misidentify severe mental health symptoms as just a normal emotional response to a cancer diagnosis, right? So there is this fine line. There is an expectation that, of course, anyone affected by cancer is going to experience some sort of emotional distress, but sometimes they're normalized too much, where that conversation about extra support, resources, connecting you to someone like a counselor or a support group, maybe that conversation doesn't come up, right? So I think it's important to take a look at this list. And there are many different things, but I think these are the top 3 that we see: distress, depression, and anxiety. So there is, of course, going to be some overlap here. And so, this list is not all inclusive, just to give you an idea of kind of what this looks like. So distress, a lot of times it's feelings of sadness and anger, but also a sense of hopelessness or hopelessness, feeling out of control, experiencing uncertainty, that's a big one. Pulling away from friends and family. We see it, those that are in distress tend to isolate themselves, worrying about your role at home or even socially, right? How that's going to change. And then moving on to depression, a sense of emotional numbness, feeling guilty. And I'm not just talking about like a one-off, afternoon of feeling guilty. I'm talking about really heavy feelings of guilt that you can't let go of. Moodiness, difficulty concentrating, a lack of joy or pleasure in things that you used to enjoy, thoughts of self-harm, of course, problems sleeping. There are some physical symptoms associated like dry mouth, upset stomach, and headaches, and of course, changes in energy level. And then anxiety, which I would say is probably the most common, uncontrolled worry, difficulty focusing, muscle tension, trembling, shaking, restlessness, also those physical symptoms, dry mouth, racing heartbeat, irritability and angry outbursts can be a sign that someone is experiencing anxiety. And so it's really important to know the signs and symptoms. And again, not to over pathologize or say that there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. It's important to just understand that everyone needs a little bit of extra support, and it might be time for you to reach out for help if you have been experiencing some of these things regularly. So it is really important to talk about coping, because I'm sure you've heard of coping with cancer, coping with the stress of being a caregiver. This word coping is everywhere in the cancer experience. But what is coping, right? How do we cope? So really, to understand it a little bit better, it's managing and understanding what you need to improve your situation. This could be making efforts to bring certain problems under control. It could be maintaining a healthy balance between realism and cautious optimism. Now, I didn't say that coping is easy, and these things, this is a simplified bullet pointed list. But remembering that there is no right or wrong way to feel during this time. You need to give yourself permission to feel whatever it is that you're feeling and hold space for it. And like I said before, most people will experience some mental health concerns, but they only really become a problem when they start to interfere with your daily life. So thinking about how well you can do your normal day-to-day activities. For example, you might feel too depressed to eat, get up out of bed in the morning, to get dressed, right? You might have very little motivation. And I'm not just talking about like a motivation to like get up and exercise. I'm talking about a feeling of not really enjoying life or taking part in life, and not wanting to participate in life. How well you cope with treatment. And this is really common. For example, you might feel too anxious to go to the hospital or go to your treatment center, or start feeling really anxious when you leave your home in general. So these are all very common things to experience, but just because they're common doesn't mean that they're easy. And just because they're common doesn't mean you shouldn't get support, okay? So learning to cope, again, thinking of it as managing the internal and external stress of difficult situations. Really asking yourself, what can you do for you that makes you feel better? Really. And I think that a lot of times this simple question is overlooked. And I really want to invite you to take a pause and ask yourself what you can do for yourself that's realistic. I have a list here that I'm going to go through, but I just want you to think of them as suggestions or options. Anything that I share here is not all inclusive, is not the end all be all of everything. There's no magic coping pill that takes away the stress of a cancer experience, but I hope that I can continue to empower you with some of this information. So one thing that you can do is keep track of your feelings. Now, that's simplified, but what I really mean is, find a way to express yourself. Some people journal. I'm biased, that's one of my favorites. Some people do expressive arts like painting or drawing or photography or music, singing, whatever it may be, right? Keeping track of your feelings is such an important part of this, because it also gives you that opportunity to reflect on what you've been through, and reflect on the challenges that might be coming up. Focus on what you can control. With a cancer experience, the first thing that goes out the window is control, right? You get diagnosed and automatically choices are taken from you. Hold on one second, sorry. So focusing on the things that you can control can help decrease anxiety. And what I mean by this is, you can control what time you get up in the morning. A lot of times you can control how you fuel your body, depending on any nutritional limitations you might have. You can control how you respond to things. You can control how much energy you put into relationships, people that might not be serving you, right? So I think that it's really easy to get swept up into this loss of control and the inability to have control over what's going on. That's extremely overwhelming. But by trying to take a step back and looking at, okay, what are some things that I still can make choices about? What are some things that are in my control that maybe I haven't considered yet, right? Another thing, and we will be doing this at the end of our time together, practice mindfulness and meditation. Now, for those that have never done a mindfulness exercise or a meditation exercise, there's so many different types of mindfulness and meditation. It's not always just what you think of, like sitting on a cushion for 20 minutes in silence, trying not to think scary thoughts. That's not really the type of meditation I'm talking about, although that can be useful for a lot of people. For mindfulness, I think about going for a walk for 5 minutes outside without your headphones and not looking at your phone and using your 5 senses to observe what's going on in the present moment, right? That's mindfulness. Eating your favorite meal with no distractions and really sitting with maybe the joy that comes from enjoying something that you love, right? And then meditation, at the end of this webinar, we're going to do a short guided meditation together. But meditation, oftentimes it's best to start with guided meditations because it can be difficult to create that quiet space where you can practice not thinking. It is literally a practice and it can be difficult to start, but I do think that it can be so helpful in providing the space and time to really allow yourself to feel and process without judgment. Share your feelings with people close to you. So, we've seen that sometimes people with cancer or caregivers feel like they're a burden to their loved ones, especially if they feel as if they're complaining too much, or, maybe they've been in a low mood and they think they're being like a Debbie Downer. There is this feeling of, well, I can't really talk about it with my family or friends because then they get sad and then I have to deal with their sadness. That is completely true. That's a thing that happens all the time. So if you do find that sharing your feelings with people that are close to you is actually causing you more emotional stress, then I'm going to move to the next bullet. Seeking individual counseling with a professional might be the next best option for you. I think for a lot of people, they feel that their cancer diagnosis is theirs alone to cope with, which can lead to that feeling of isolation, feeling that no one gets it, no one ever will understand what I'm going through. And while it is okay to feel isolated, there's nothing wrong with that. I want to encourage you to think about asking for help and understanding that there are professionals out there like oncology social workers, like psychologists, psychiatrists, other people on your medical team that might be able to provide you with that support, or at least give you a referral to someone that can provide you with that support. Along the same lines, joining a support group, and we'll take some time to talk about the different types of support in a little bit, but we know that support groups really provide an environment where someone that's affected by cancer, again, whether they've been diagnosed or a loved one's been diagnosed, they don't have to explain the details or like the ins and outs of what they're going through because there's a common understanding of the experience. It's common ground. Now, I do want to recognize that support groups are not for everyone, depending on where you're at in your cancer experience, because of course they can be triggering. It can be difficult to listen to other people's stories and their experiences. If they are worse than what you're going through, there can be a sense of guilt. But also if you notice that their stories, let's say you have advanced cancer, you join a group and it's mostly people with early stage cancer, the conversation is going to be different. The challenges are going to be different. So I just wanted to share that too, because again, it's not support group or individual counseling or peer support, right? It's about figuring out what you need and how to ask for it. And then, of course, telling a doctor or nurse about your feelings. And this goes along the line of trying to confide in your medical team if you do need additional support so that they can provide you with referrals if needed. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about coping with some of the common responses to a cancer diagnosis. And again, this is for both patients and caregivers. Shock is usually the first reaction, or maybe you cope by pretending it's not happening, right? So these are completely normal responses, but it can be difficult to manage over a long period of time, especially if your shock moves into denial, which moves into like full denial. It can be really difficult to manage that. So I want to start with, in the beginning, if you're in shock, you might feel numb, in disbelief of what's happening, like there's an information overload, that you might need information repeated over and over, or you might have difficulty expressing yourself. That's very common. And with denial, which we see a lot, especially in the beginning, feels like you can't think about it or talk about it. You don't want to know anything about the diagnosis, about the treatment plan, and you prefer to just talk about it as little as possible. So, again, these are coping mechanisms that our brain engage in to help, of course, protect us. But I think another thing that I want to talk about in denial, you might not be in denial, but maybe your loved one is, or your loved ones are. And what that can look like is them dismissing your anxiety about your diagnosis, or they might seem to ignore the fact that you have cancer, or downplay your symptoms, or even your feelings by changing the subject when you bring up something that you want to talk about. So we know that loved ones respond this way out of fear, because by talking about it, they can pretend like it's not happening. But we know that this can be very hurtful. So if you've experienced this, try to tell them how you feel about that and explain that talking about what you're going through has actually been helpful, and kind of inviting them to participate in that conversation with you. Now, coping with sadness, it's normal to feel sad after you've been diagnosed or a loved one has been diagnosed. And this connects to what I said earlier about grief, because there is so much grief with a cancer experience. You might be sad that you lost your good health, and maybe you've lost the ability to do some things that you enjoy. It might be the uncertainty of the future that's upsetting you the most. The sadness you feel can be really challenging to navigate, because often there is a pressure to be positive, and although, of course, there's research that shows a positive outlook can be helpful, I also want to just highlight the idea of toxic positivity and how forcing yourself to be positive all the time can actually be more harmful, because it doesn't allow you to acknowledge your feelings and to provide space to process. And it really kind of just pushes them down in a way. So I think that finding a balance between optimism and pessimism, depending on what feels right for you, you're feeling sad and you might want to be alone most of the time. You might not want to talk about it. But it's also important to understand the difference between sadness and depression. Again, sadness is not the same as depression, and depression it's more all-encompassing. It's consistent over longer periods of time. And so if you find that your sadness is moving into just something that is much more persistent in terms of low mood, in terms of lots of pleasure in doing things, that's when you know, like I said before, when it interferes with your life in a negative way, that's when you know you need help. Okay. Coping with fear and anxiety. So fear, anxiety, and panic are very, very difficult feelings to manage. Now, it's important to note that most people with cancer or caregivers of people with cancer won't feel anxious all the time. You may just have short episodes of feeling very anxious, and that could happen, of course, like just before treatment, or when you think about going to the hospital, or if you have to go to the hospital for a checkup or a treatment center. So some ways to cope with the feelings of fear, anxiety, and panic. You might want to try taking a friend or a relative to support you during treatment if there's someone that can sit with you. Getting reassurance from your nurses and doctors, talking about the treatment plan, letting them know how you're feeling, it can be really helpful to open up to them. Using relaxation exercises such as deep breathing, mindfulness, or visualization before or during a stressful situation. Having a relaxing massage or reflexology treatment once a week, or any type of relaxation that you can engage in. Some of them aren't accessible to everyone. Of course, some of them are expensive, but also looking to see what free services might be available to you. And then doing some form of regular exercise that you enjoy. Now, when I say exercise, I don't necessarily mean like getting in the gym and lifting weights. And I mean, if that's what you enjoy and it's safe for you to do so, of course, that's fine. But exercise can just be movement. When's the last time you put on your favorite song and danced around? When's the last time you went for a 5 or 10 minute walk without music or without stimulation, right? I think that stretching, yoga, even restorative yoga, gentle movement is so important to remember as well. Feelings of guilt. And this is a big one too, because guilt is a very common emotion experienced by those that have been diagnosed or caring for a loved one. And it's usually that feeling of blame and regret that's hard to accept and express. And it really leads to people replaying that like what if or if only scenarios in their minds to try to figure out what they could have done differently, if anything. So we see people with cancer and also caregivers experiencing guilt at various times for various reasons. So some of the reasons we see, you could have maybe noticed symptoms earlier, gone to the doctor sooner, you worry about being a burden to your loved ones, maybe your treatment didn't work as well as you hoped it would, knowing that cancer can be a financial burden. There might be some self-blame for lifestyle choices that might have increased your risk for cancer. And then also caregivers experience guilt as well. They might feel guilty that they're healthy and their loved one isn't, that maybe they aren't able to help as much as they want to, that they have no control over their loved one's health, feeling stressed and sad and not feeling that they can talk about it. So how do we cope? How do we cope with guilt? We know that difficult feelings of guilt over long periods of time can lead to depression. So it's important to keep in mind that cancer is not your fault or anyone else's. And feelings of guilt will come and go. They are going to ebb and flow throughout the cancer experience. Talking about these feelings can definitely help. Joining a support group can also help. I think that finding ways to express yourself, finding activities that help you relax and feel good, creating moments of joy. These are all really important things to keep in mind. And listen, a lot of people don't talk about their guilt because it's hard to express, but it can be really helpful to write if you feel up to writing in a journal. It doesn't even have to be in a journal. It could be your notepad on your phone or wherever. Writing about the guilt that you're carrying around and asking yourself if you're ready to let go of it, right? Because that is part of it. Forgiving yourself for things that you're holding on to and finding a way to let go. So we know that all of these things can lead to a lack of self-care. And, I'm not talking about the self-care that's like massages every week or mani-pedis or, that can be self-care. But I'm also just talking about making room for yourself, asking yourself what your needs are, trying to meet those needs, which are things that really we don't always do. So lack of self-care can lead to physical changes, right? Fatigue, illness, because we know that stress and lack of self-care leads to being immunocompromised, and many are already immunocompromised. It can lead to appetite and weight changes. There are, of course, those emotional changes as well. If you're feeling burnt out, you're going to be irritable and sad. You feel anxious, lonely. There might be bouts of consistent crying and lack of concentration. So you see that everything is connected here. All of this is connected. And so if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation today, is that one, it's never too late to ask for help, but also two, finding out how to meet your needs and what your needs are is a huge part of managing your mental health and taking care of yourself emotionally after a diagnosis. So I did want to include some information on learning how to ask for help. And the reason is because it's really important to acknowledge that most of us aren't taught to ask for help and how to do this and how to get support. And this could be, again, this extends across cultural, religious, and spiritual and generational lines, because many of us were not encouraged to ask for help because there, again, stigma around being weak or that we weren't good enough. So it's really important to understand that asking for help does not mean that you are weak. Only 40% of cancer survivors reported that their medical teams discussed the impact cancer could have on their relationships or emotional well-being, and that a major barrier to getting support was lack of knowledge about resources, right? So this is a part of it, right? Feeling empowered to ask for help and who to ask for help, acknowledging that a cancer diagnosis impacts not only the person diagnosed with cancer, but the caregivers and the family system too. Understanding that it's really normal to need extra help when you're dealing with cancer. I think the thing that we see the most is many people who could benefit from the support services either don't use them because they don't know about them or they don't know how to find them. So I do want you to think about the kinds of problems you're experiencing, how much your emotions are bothering you, and how you've coped with challenges in the past. This is going to help you decide what kind of support is going to be best for you and how to access that support. Okay, so, and again, this is not all of the support that's available out there, but I did want to focus on 3 main categories here. Like I said, finding the right kind of support starts with asking yourself what you need. We know through the research that feeling supported leads to better health outcomes over time. So individual support, and I have mentioned this, right? This could be with a social worker, this could be with a therapist, psychologist. This can help you process your feelings in an individualized way. It really provides safe space to address individual concerns, learn new ways to manage stress and difficult emotions. It can help you gain insight and understand your own experience better. It can also help you learn new coping skills. And I think one of the benefits to individual support is that it is really tailored to you. You have a lot of say in the things that you work on and you know, your experience that you're processing. It could be really helpful once you find someone that you connect with to have that space to really talk about what you've been through and get feedback on it. For group support, we see that groups can be led by peers or they can be led by professionals. There's all different types of group support, but the benefits of groups are that it can provide a common understanding and a safe environment. Like I said earlier on, you know, you don't really have to explain as much in a support group where everyone has that common ground. It definitely decreases isolation and loneliness for those that are seeking that connection. And it's a great way to gather information and share resources with others and to gain coping skills. Now, at CancerCare, we offer 2 different types of support groups. They're both led by oncology social workers. One is a live support group that's over Zoom, and those are those for living in New York and New Jersey. But we also have an online support group program that is available to people in all 50 states. And this is a message board format that is led by an oncology social worker. And the reason why I want to share these 2 different modalities is because you know, you might not want to join a support group that's just live video once a week or once a month or whatever it may be. That might not work with your needs right now. Maybe the only time you have available is, you know, in the middle of the night or, you know, in between treatments, or maybe you don't have the energy to be awake during the day. So I want you to get curious about support and really try to explore the different options out there to find the best one for you. And then also peer support. You know, there are many organizations out there that will match you with a peer. 2 that I'm thinking of are Immerman Angels and Cancer Hope Network. You might be familiar with them, but it's so helpful to be matched, just like in a support group where there's that common ground, it's the same thing, right? Common ground with someone that's been through it. And oftentimes they try to match you with someone that is a little bit further along in the experience so that they can also provide insight and support. It's very helpful to learn that you're not alone. It can really help you gain confidence and inspire resilience. And also you can learn more about your diagnosis from someone that's been through it. I'm not really talking about getting medical advice from your peer, but I think it's important to talk about treatments and side effects and similarities that you may be experiencing. So if you've been struggling with some of the things that I've mentioned today, just know that the right support is out there and is available to you. And sometimes it's just knowing how to ask the right questions. Now, before we go into the meditation and head into Q&A, just wanted to spend a little bit talking about CancerCare. So for those that don't know or are unaware, CancerCare is a national nonprofit organization that provides free support services to people affected by cancer. So we have individual counseling with oncology social worker. Now, it is for people living in New York and New Jersey, and that's due to our licensing restrictions as social workers, but those are free of charge, those sessions. And our support groups, like I said, we do have some in person, but mainly we have our live groups via Zoom. And then we have our online support group, which is support groups which are available nationally. We have education workshops that you can listen to over the phone and online. Resource navigation is a program that helps provide practical guidance, information, and resources that's available nationally to patients and caregivers. We have tons of publications on our website that you can download for free or order for free online. We offer some limited financial and co-payment assistance for things like transportation to treatment, and we do have some things for home care and child care. We offer community programs, and these are in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. We have a podcast called Cancer Out Loud, where we interview cancer care clients and ask them to speak about their experience. And we also do coping circle workshops, which are very similar to webinars like this one, where we are taking educational information and they're hosted by oncology social workers, and really a way to spread awareness and information about specific topics and to provide emotional support. Okay, so we are going to move into a short meditation before we wrap up. It'll be about 5 minutes. Okay, so make sure I can play this. One moment. Okay, this was supposed to be a video, but like it's not playing right now. Okay. So I'm going to, it was just some background music, but I'm going to do the meditation anyway. Thank you for your flexibility. So the goal of this short meditation is to help you cultivate greater compassion for your emotional experience. As humans, we experience a range of emotions, from those that uplift us to those that challenge us. And a lot of times we're judging these emotions. We might believe that we shouldn't feel sad, angry, jealous. Today, we are going to soften our judgments. Oh, there it is. Today, we will soften our judgments of these more difficult emotions and hold them with care instead. Okay. So to get started, find a comfortable seated position. Let your eyes close gently when you're ready, or you can also let your gaze soften towards the floor. And now take a moment to connect with the seat or other surface beneath you. Know that this surface is supporting you now and throughout this practice. Now scan your body gently from the base of your spine all the way to the very top of your head. If you encounter any areas of tension that can be gently softened, I invite you to soften them or to offer a loving breath in their direction. When you are finished with this gentle scan, call to mind a time where you experienced a difficult emotion. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most intense, this should be an emotion that you would rate at a level 3, 4, or 5. And if at any point this practice is feeling overwhelming, return your attention to the felt sense of the surface beneath you or any other anchor that's supporting you right now. And as you hold the situation and emotion in mind, notice if there are any judgments attached to it. Is there a feeling of self-criticism, either strong or subtle? Is there righteousness, either strong or subtle? Notice whatever judgments might be there and see if you can soften them as you exhale. And as you inhale, welcome self-compassion into your experience. So instead of judging your emotions to be good or bad, right or wrong, notice the sheer fact of their presence, and then invite a caring attitude towards them. You can welcome self-compassion into your emotional experience by resting a tender palm on your heart, or by offering yourself words. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Amen. Or by offering yourself words of self-compassion. You might repeat, I witness my emotions without judgment. I love, honor, and care for myself. I am here for myself through all of life's experiences. Let these words, or the loving presence of your palm on your heart, help to soften the stories and judgments you hold about this emotion. Rest in this self-compassion, continuing to soften your thoughts about the emotion at hand as you continue to cultivate care. I witness my emotions without judgment. I love, honor, and care for myself. I am here for myself through all of life's experiences. Offer yourself a word of gratitude for this practice now. It's not easy to offer ourselves compassion. And now take 2 or 3 clearing breaths. Taking your time, whenever you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes to come back to the room. Thank you so much for joining me in that short meditation. I hope that you were able to feel a few moments of calm, even if this practice was difficult, if this was your first time offering yourself words of self-compassion or using positive affirmations like we used in this guided meditation. Just know that it can be difficult to start. It's not always easy, but this is just one example of the time that you can give yourself even under 5 minutes, to create that caring space for yourself. And that brings us to the end of my presentation today. So I just wanted to open it up for any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I know I personally feel very relaxed that meditation. I hope people listening also feel the same way. This was an excellent presentation. You're really good. And I hope that the people listening know that Cancer Care and yourself are just a wonderful resource to tap into for help. We do have time for questions. So if anybody wants to type them into the Q&A or the chat, I can ask. I do want to just, while people are thinking about that, I want to point out that when you were mentioning about group support and peer support, the Life App group also hosts patient support groups as well as caregiver support groups. And we also have a wonderful mentor program as well. People want to speak to individuals who've been living with the diagnosis for longer and have somebody they want to talk to. It's a program we're really proud of. And I think a lot of our patients and caregivers have gotten a lot of support from it.
That's amazing. Those are invaluable programs, really.
Yeah. I found walking a great distractor, even though I don't feel suffering from mental issues. Great for the soul was a comment from one of the participants.
Absolutely. Walking, I mean, and for those, I know for some walking is not possible right now, but if you're feeling up to it, you don't have to walk fast. Walking can be such a great way to just give yourself space and to even meditate. Walking can be very meditative. Listening to a podcast, a book on an audiobook, music, whatever you'd like to do. But I do like walking without music too, because it can be really powerful.
So I have a question is for you would be, we have a platform called Just Chat, which is a private chat group forum that we host. And there's also Facebook groups as well. And sometimes people, just speaking to the emotion of guilt that you were talking about earlier, sometimes people feel guilt sharing good things. Or maybe even bad things because they don't want to change the dynamic of the group. Survivors get guilt as well, that they might be doing really well and other people who are commenting are doing less well. What would you do to speak to those people so that there's perhaps less of a need to hold back in that type of forum?
So I think that I would draw attention to the fact that multiple things are true at once, right? And I think that it can be really hard in those spaces, like you said, to share something positive if you feel that other people in the group might be suffering. And I think that it's really important to know that just because someone is experiencing something positive, it doesn't dismiss the challenge that someone else is experiencing. So I think I would really try to dispel this idea that sharing something positive or even negative is, it basically it feels like you're responsible for someone else's emotions, to how they respond to what you share, right? So reminding them that you're not responsible for how they respond, multiple truths exist, and really providing space to hold two things at once or three things at once. I think we really get into this all or nothing, black or white thinking. It's very common, but it can be really destructive because it creates barriers in communication. So I think I would start there, and then also maybe opening it up in the conversation and ask people to talk about how they've experienced these feelings of guilt, where it shows up the most, to try to give them a little bit more support on how they can communicate.
Thank you. Actually, a few things have come in since you answered that question. One person wants to know if LRG has a list of free individual counseling in other states. So we actually don't. I know that there's something called Psychology Today, where you can find a counselor, but with CancerCare, where you mentioned individual counseling, is that billed with insurance? Like what?
So all of our services are free. So if you are living in the New York, New Jersey area, and I mean physically residing in one of those states, you can definitely call us to inquire about counseling. And it is, of course, free of charge. As a short-term model. In terms of free counseling that's available out there, programs are unique, definitely, but I know also that depending on where you are in the US, Gilda's Club and Cancer Support Community, they also offer some individual support depending on the chapter, the local chapter.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Any tips for dealing with disappointment of how someone you're very close to handled your sharing your diagnosis or situation? For example, they never followed up with you after an important appointment, kind of basically disappeared.
So it's hard because the first thing is like you might feel as if you need to grieve that relationship, or there are a couple of ways you could handle it. You could express your disappointment to this person if it's important to you to continue this relationship and find a way to work through it. You could remind yourself that unfortunately, with cancer, we see either people coming out of the woodwork that we never thought would support us, or we also see some of the people that we expected to be there every second are all of a sudden ghosts. And it could be that they are dealing with their own challenges of you being ill, but I don't want you to internalize that because it's not your fault. So two things. One, do you want to continue the relationship with this person? Do you feel like you could have a conversation about it and also share what you hope what your expectations would be for support, or practicing acceptance around other people's limitations and what they're able to do, and providing space for that disappointment. It is absolutely okay to be disappointed, and that it is really hard when people in your life don't show up the way you want them to. You know, it is really challenging. So there's no magic answer, but there are ways through.
Thank you. I guess just one person had shared a comment about how the LRG's mentor relationship was very special to them when they were first newly diagnosed. The medical teams have their expertise, but talking to somebody who goes through it is also really important. So anybody listening, I encourage you to consider the mentor program. And if you also feel like you're at a stage where you can mentor somebody else, we welcome volunteers to be mentors as well. So please contact the Life Wrap group for that. I just want to thank you so much, Sarah. This was an excellent session today. We are so blessed to have such a great relationship with CancerCare over many years. And we really look forward to it continuing. So thanks for making the time today. And if anything else comes in, we'll let you know if any other questions come through.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. And of course, I'm going to put my email in the chat. If any, or Sarah, if you could put my email maybe in the chat somewhere, it's just spaul@cancercare.org. If any other questions come through, you know, or you think of something later on where you're like, oh, I forgot, I wanted to ask this, feel free to send me an email and I'll respond to you.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. So I put that in there, and we're going to be sharing the archived recording with the community as well. So stay tuned. Okay. Lovely. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.